The first time my wife told me the best years of her life were before she met me, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I honestly thought she had to be joking. We were sitting across from each other at our kitchen table on a Thursday night, eating takeout because neither of us had the energy to cook. Our daughter, Lily, was upstairs doing homework. Our son, Evan, was at a friend's house. For once, the house was almost completely quiet. Sarah had a glass of wine in front of her. I had a beer. It was one of those ordinary nights that should have disappeared into the thousands of other ordinary nights we'd shared. Instead, it became the night I started questioning 20 years of my marriage. We'd been talking about the kids. Evan was 19 and had started looking at colleges. Sarah had spent the last few weeks worrying about application deadlines, financial aid, and whether he was actually ready to leave home. Lily was 16 and had recently started talking about getting her driver's license. I remember looking at Sarah and suddenly realizing how quickly everything had changed. The kids weren't little anymore. The house wouldn't always be noisy. There wouldn't always be backpacks by the door, laundry on the stairs, or someone yelling from another room because they couldn't find a phone charger. We were getting close to something we'd talked about for years. I smiled. We're almost there. Sarah looked up from her food. Almost where? That part. What part? With part where we finally have time for ourselves. She didn't answer. I continued. You know, when the kids are older, we can travel more. Maybe go somewhere for a few weeks, do all the things we never had time for. Sarah looked down at her plate. I thought she hadn't heard me. Then she said, I don't know if I want that. I put my fork down. You don't? She shook her head. Not like that. I stared at her. What do you want? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the stairs, then back at me. And when she finally spoke, her voice was so calm that I almost wished she'd been angry. The best years of my life were before I met you. I laughed. It was a nervous reflex, a stupid little laugh that escaped before I could stop it. You mean before we had kids? No, she looked directly at me. Before I met you. My smile disappeared. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me. Somewhere upstairs, Lily dropped something and muttered under her breath. Everything around us was completely normal. But suddenly the room felt unfamiliar. Sarah, I know how it sounds. Yeah, I didn't mean it the way you're hearing it. Then how did you mean it? She looked down. I don't know. That answer somehow hurt more. What do you mean you don't know? I mean, I don't know how to explain it. Try. She took a slow breath. I was different then. Different how? I had plans. I almost smiled. You still have plans. She shook her head. No, I have things I need to do. There was something in her voice that made me stop. Not anger, not resentment, something closer to exhaustion. I looked at my wife. We had been together for 21 years, married for 19. We had 2 children, 3 houses, countless vacations, arguments, birthdays, Christmas mornings, hospital waiting rooms, grocery trips, late-night conversations, and Sunday mornings where neither of us wanted to get out of bed. I'd always thought I knew her. Now I wasn't so sure. You think your life was better before me? Sarah stayed quiet. Then she said, I think I was more myself. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. That night, Sarah fell asleep beside me like nothing had happened. I didn't. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the conversation. The best years of my life were before I met you. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to tell myself she was being unfair. I wanted to remind her of everything we'd built together. But underneath all of that was a thought I didn't want to admit. What if she was right? The next morning, Sarah acted completely normal. She made coffee, packed Lily's lunch, reminded Evan to take his jacket. She kissed me before I left for work. Have a good day. I stood by the door. Sarah. She looked at me. For a second, I almost asked her what she meant. Instead, I said, nothing. She nodded. Okay, and I left. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about one word, myself. She hadn't said she wished she'd married someone else. She hadn't said she wanted a divorce. She hadn't even said she hated our life. She said she missed herself, and that was much harder to argue with. That afternoon, I opened my phone and started scrolling through old pictures. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe evidence, maybe an explanation, maybe some sign that Sarah had been unhappy for years and I'd somehow missed it. I found a photograph from our first year together. Sarah was sitting on the hood of an old car, jeans, faded black shirt, a ridiculous pair of sunglasses. Her hair was shorter. She was laughing at something outside the frame. I zoomed in. I'd forgotten that picture existed. but there was something about her face that stopped me. It wasn't simply that she looked younger. She looked certain that her life belonged to her. I kept scrolling. There were photographs of Sarah painting. A lot of them. Canvases leaning against walls, paint on her hands, a tiny room she'd apparently used as a studio before we got married, pictures of her with her best friend, Megan, Sarah standing on a train platform, Sarah sitting in a coffee shop in a city I'd never visited, Sarah laughing beside the ocean. She looked different in those pictures. Not happier exactly, just open, like she had no idea what tomorrow was going to bring. And she liked that. I stared at one photograph for a long time. Then I realized something that made my stomach tighten. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen that expression on her face. Not the last time she'd smiled, the last time she'd looked excited about not knowing what came next. I put my phone down. For the first time in years, I wondered what had happened to that woman. And then an even worse thought followed. Maybe I hadn't watched her disappear. Maybe I'd simply never noticed she was disappearing at all. The next morning, I woke up before Sarah. For a few seconds, I forgot about the conversation. Then I looked at her sleeping beside me and remembered every word. I think I was more myself. I got out of bed quietly and went downstairs. I made coffee and stood by the kitchen window. A few minutes later, Sarah walked in. Morning. She poured herself a cup. Neither of us mentioned the night before. Finally, I said, "Do you still talk to Megan?" Sarah looked at me. "Sometimes." "How often?" She smiled. "Why?" "I was just thinking about her. You were looking at old pictures." I looked at her. "How did you know?" "You had that face." "What face?" "The face you make when you're trying to solve something." I laughed. "Maybe I'm trying to understand." Sarah took a sip of coffee. "Understanding isn't always the same as solving." "I know." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. I sat down. "Tell me about Megan." Sarah smiled. "We met in college." "I know that." "Then what do you want to know? What were you like?" She frowned. "With Megan?" "Before me." She was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. "Stupid." "That's it?" "Young, stupid, restless." "Sounds fun." It was. There was something in the way she said it. Not sadness, nostalgia. I wanted to ask more, but she stood up. "I have to get ready." "Sarah." She stopped. "Did you really mean what you said last night?" She looked at me. "Yes." That was all. She walked upstairs. I sat alone at the kitchen table. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That evening, I found an old box in the basement while looking for Christmas decorations. Written on the side in faded black marker were 2 words. Sarah, 2002. I carried it upstairs. Sarah was folding laundry in the living room. She saw the box. Her hand stopped. "Where did you find that?" "The basement." She stared at it. "I haven't seen that in years. Can we look through it?" She hesitated, then nodded. Inside were old photographs, postcards, receipts, train tickets, and things that had probably seemed important when she was 24. I picked up a photograph. Sarah was standing outside a small building with Megan. Above the door was a painted sign. "Willow Street Arts." "You worked here?" "For a while." "You never told me." She smiled. "I probably did. I don't remember." "I know." I looked through another photograph. Sarah was sitting behind a table covered with paintbrushes. She was covered in paint herself. She looked exhausted and happy. "What was this?" "Someone else's studio." "You wanted your own?" She looked at me. "I did." I found a small notebook. "What about this?" She reached for it. "That's private." I handed it back. "Okay." She placed it on the table. Then I noticed something written inside the box. A sentence in faded blue ink. "Don't forget to become someone." I looked at Sarah. "You wrote that?" "Yes." "When?" "Before I met you." "Who were you trying to become?" She smiled faintly. "I don't remember." That answer stayed with me. Later that night, I asked her another question. "Did you ever have a dream you gave up?" She was sitting at the kitchen table. She thought for a while. "I wanted a studio." "I know." "No, you don't." She looked at me. "I didn't just want to paint." "What did you want?" "I wanted a place where I could make things without asking whether they were useful." I didn't know what to say. She continued. "I wanted to wake up and decide what I was going to do that day." "You can still do that." She smiled. "Can I?" "Of course." She looked around the kitchen, at the family calendar, at the school notices, at the stack of bills. Then she looked back at me. "I don't know." I felt frustrated. "Sarah, what's stopping you?" She was quiet. "Nothing." I waited. She picked up her coffee. "That's the problem." The next weekend, I suggested we look for a small place she could use as a studio. She immediately shook her head. "No." "Why?" "Because I don't need you to build me a studio. I'm not trying to build it for you." "You are." I just want to help. I know, she smiled sadly. And that's what makes this so hard. I didn't understand. What am I supposed to do? She looked at me. I don't know. Then how am I supposed to help? She paused. You could stop trying to. That hurt. I didn't show it. A few days later, I called Megan. She answered after several rings. David, hey, is everything okay? Yeah. I almost laughed. Apparently, I wasn't convincing. I wanted to ask you about Sarah. There was silence. What about her? Who was she before me? Megan didn't answer immediately. Then she said, Why are you asking me that now? Because she told me the best years of her life were before she met me. Megan didn't answer immediately. Then she said, Why are you asking me that now? Because she told me the best years of her life were before she met me. Megan was quiet. Sarah was always like that. Like what? She could want 10 different things at once. I smiled. That sounds familiar. No. Her voice became more serious. You don't understand. What? She used to believe her life could go in any direction. I looked down at the floor. And then? Then she met you. I felt my stomach tighten. Was that bad? No, Megan answered immediately. She loved you. Then what changed? She started choosing. Choosing what? Everyone else. I didn't speak. Megan continued. Sarah never gave things up because you told her to. Then why did she? Because every time she had to choose between herself and someone she loved, she chose them. I thought about the years we'd been together. The art program she never attended. The studio she never opened. The trip she canceled. The job she didn't take. The things she'd always called temporary. Maybe later, when the kids are older, when things settle down. I'd always believed those were choices we were making together. Maybe they hadn't been. Did I make her feel like she couldn't do those things? No. Then what did I do? Megan sighed. You loved her. I frowned. That's the problem? No. She paused. Sometimes when someone loves you enough to support every sacrifice, you stop noticing that they're making one. I sat there in silence. Megan's words followed me long after we hung up. That night, I watched Sarah sitting at the table with the kids. Evan was talking about college. Lily was complaining about her driving lessons. Sarah laughed. She asked questions. She remembered every little detail, but when Evan asked her what she had been doing lately, she shrugged. Nothing much. I stared at her. She had spent 20 years making sure everyone else had an answer. Maybe she'd forgotten she was allowed to have one of her own. A few days later, I came home from work and found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open in front of her. She closed it when I walked in. I noticed. She noticed me noticing. What? She asked. Nothing. You have that face again. What face? The one where you're about to ask a question. I smiled. Okay, what were you looking at? She hesitated. An old program. What kind? An art program. I pulled out a chair. The one in Chicago? She looked surprised. How did you know? Megan mentioned it. Sarah leaned back. I forgot she told you. You applied once, didn't you? Yes. And didn't go. No. Why? She looked at the screen. Because I was pregnant. I remembered. Our first child. Evan. I was 28. Sarah was 26. We'd been married for about a year. I remembered that period as one of the happiest times of my life. Apparently she remembered something else too. You could have gone, I said. She looked at me. David, I'm serious. You were working. We could have made it work. I was pregnant. Still, she shook her head. You would have supported me. Yes, but I didn't want to leave. Why? Because I wanted to be with you. I felt relieved for about half a second. Then I realized she was looking at me with a sadness I couldn't explain. I wanted both, she said. I didn't know what to say. She closed the laptop. There were always two things I wanted. Family and painting? Not exactly. She thought for a moment. I wanted a family. Then she looked at me. And I wanted a life that was mine. I sat there quietly. Why couldn't you have both? She smiled. That's what I thought too. That evening, Sarah went upstairs early. I stayed in the kitchen. I opened my phone and searched through old emails. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Then I found one. It was from Sarah. Years ago, she'd sent me a link to an apartment she wanted to rent as a small studio. I remembered the conversation. She'd been excited. I'd told her it was expensive, not because I didn't want her to have it, because we'd just bought our house. I remembered saying, we can do it later. I stared at the message. She'd replied, okay, just that, okay. I closed my eyes. I remembered another conversation, the 6-month program, another, the trip with Megan, another, going back to school. Every time, I had said some version of the same thing. We can do it later. And every time Sarah had said, okay, I'd thought those were conversations. Maybe they had been decisions. The next morning, I asked her about the studio. Did you really want it? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? She looked confused. I did. I mean, really tell me. She stared at me. What does that mean? I mean, why didn't you say, David, this is important to me. I need to do this. She gave me a tired smile. Because I shouldn't have needed to. That sentence hurt. What do you mean? You shouldn't have needed me to convince you. I would have said yes. I know. Then why? Because by the time I needed you to say yes, I'd already convinced myself not to ask. I looked down. She continued. You never told me I couldn't do anything. I know. You never stopped me. I know. But you also never asked me what I was willing to give up to do it. I looked at her. What do you mean? You asked whether we could afford it. That's a reasonable question. I know. You asked whether the kids would be okay. Another reasonable question. I know. She sighed. But nobody asked whether it was worth it to me. That was the first time I understood the difference. I'd been thinking about consequences. Sarah had been thinking about permission. And neither of us had realized it. That night, I found her in the garage. She had cleared a small space on the workbench. There were brushes everywhere. A canvas leaned against the wall. What are you doing? Painting. When did you start? Today. I smiled. Can I see? She turned the canvas around. It wasn't finished. There was a dark background with a bright line cutting through it. I stared at it. I like it. You don't have to. I actually do. She smiled. Then I asked the wrong question. What are you going to do with it? Her expression changed. I don't know. I stopped. She laughed. See? What? That's what I mean. I was just asking. I know. She put the brush down. You don't have to know what something is for. I nodded. She looked at the painting. Maybe that's what I forgot. I sat on an old chair beside her. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I don't think you ruined my life. I looked at her. I never thought you did. I know. She took a breath. But I think we both got very good at building a life that looked right. I looked around the garage. What do you mean? We did everything we were supposed to do. House, kids, jobs, vacations, savings, retirement plans. What's wrong with that? Nothing. She looked at me. That's what makes it hard. I understood. There wasn't a dramatic mistake to point at. No one had cheated. No one had lied. No one had deliberately hurt the other. We had simply become very good at being a family. And somewhere inside that success, Sarah had stopped being certain who she was when nobody needed her. I wanted to tell her we'd fix it. I wanted to promise her that from now on, she could do whatever she wanted. But I stopped myself. Instead, I asked, what do you want now? She stared at the unfinished canvas. I don't know. Then she smiled. But I think I want to find out. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to tell her how. Over the next few weeks, something changed between us. Not dramatically. There was no big conversation where we promised to fix our marriage. No rules. No new beginning. Sarah simply started doing small things she'd stopped doing years ago. One Tuesday, she came home from work and said, I'm going to the garage. I looked up from the television. Painting? Yeah. Okay. She smiled. That's it? What else should I say? I don't know. You said you're going to paint. She laughed. Fair. Another night, she went out with Megan. They hadn't seen each other in person for almost 2 years. Sarah didn't ask if I minded. She just told me she was going. And I didn't make a joke about her being out late. I didn't ask when she'd be home. I didn't ask what they were going to talk about. I said, have fun. When she came home after midnight, she looked exhausted, but she was smiling. Good night, she said. Good night. She stopped halfway up the stairs. David? Yeah? I had a really good time. I smiled. I'm glad. She went upstairs. It was such a small exchange that I probably wouldn't have remembered it if everything else hadn't already changed. Then, one Friday afternoon, I came home and found her sitting at the kitchen table with an envelope in front of her. She looked serious. What's that? She pushed it toward me. The return address was from Chicago. I recognized the organization immediately. The program? She nodded. I opened the letter. It wasn't the same 6-month program she'd applied to years ago. This was a 3-week residency for former applicants and local artists. 3 weeks, studio space, workshops, no degree, no long-term commitment, just 3 weeks of painting. At the bottom of the page was a sentence. We would be honored to have you join us. I looked at Sarah. You applied? Yesterday. I smiled. When did you decide? I didn't. What do you mean? I applied because I wanted to know what it felt like to apply. I laughed. That's very Sarah. She smiled. Then her expression became serious. I didn't think they'd accept me. Why not? I haven't painted seriously in years. That doesn't mean you can't. I know. She looked at the letter. That's what everyone keeps saying. There was something in her voice, not excitement, fear. You don't have to go. She looked at me. I know. You don't have to decide tonight. I know. I nodded. Then she said, but I think I want to. I smiled. Then go. She looked at me carefully. You really mean that? Yes. What about the kids? They're 16 and 19. What about you? I'll survive. She laughed. I mean us. I understood. Us will be okay. She looked down. I've spent my whole life making sure everyone else would be okay. She folded the letter. I'm not very good at believing I will be. I wanted to tell her that she would. Instead, I said, then maybe this is something you get to practice. She looked at me. Then she smiled. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She nodded. I haven't been away from you that long since we got married. I know. Are you scared? I thought about lying. Yes. Why? Because I don't know what you'll find there. She looked at me. I don't either. That was the truth. And somehow it made the decision feel more real. The next few days were strange. Sarah started preparing. She bought a new suitcase. She dug out old brushes. She made a list of supplies. She even found the sunglasses from the photograph I'd been looking at. She put them on in the kitchen. I laughed. You kept those? I forgot I had them. You look ridiculous. I looked ridiculous 22 years ago too. That's true. She smiled. Then she took them off. For a moment I saw the woman from that old photograph again, not because she looked younger, because she looked curious. And I realized I hadn't been missing her old self. I had been missing that expression, the feeling that something could still happen. The night before she left, we sat on the porch. Her suitcase was inside by the door. The kids were upstairs. The neighborhood was quiet. Sarah rested her head against my shoulder. I'm scared. Me too, she laughed. You're not the one going. No, she was quiet. Then she said, what if I love it? Then you'll love it. What if I come back and want to change everything? I thought about it. Then we'll figure out what needs changing. She lifted her head. See? What? You're doing it again. Doing what? Making it a problem you have to solve. I smiled. You're right. She looked at me. I don't know what will happen. Okay, I might come back and decide I hate painting. Okay, I might decide I want to do something completely different. Okay, I might realize I don't know what I want at all. I smiled. That one's probably the most likely. She laughed. Then she became quiet. David? Yeah? Do you regret meeting me? The question caught me off guard. No, not even a little. I regret things. That's not what I asked. I looked at her. No, I don't regret meeting you. She nodded. Good. I waited. Do you regret meeting me? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said no. I felt something loosen in my chest. But I regret something else. What? She looked out at the street. I regret how easily I stopped asking myself what I wanted. I nodded. I understand. No, you don't. She smiled. Not yet. The next morning I drove her to the airport. The goodbye wasn't dramatic. She hugged the kids. Then she hugged me. She held on a little longer than usual. I'll call you. Whenever you want. She smiled. Don't say that. Why? Because I'll feel guilty if I don't. I laughed. Okay, call when you want to talk. Better. She picked up her bag, and she looked at me. I love you. I love you too. And then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd. On the drive home, I kept thinking about what she'd said. She hadn't gone to Chicago to find her old life. She wasn't trying to become 24 again. She was trying to find out who she could become at 45. And for the first time in our marriage, I knew there was nothing I could do to make that answer happen faster. I could only wait and let her find it herself. The first few days without Sarah felt strange. Not because the house was difficult to manage. I could cook. I could do laundry. I could make sure Lily got where she needed to go. Evan was 19. He didn't need much from me anymore. That was the strange part. For years, Sarah and I had talked about the day the kids wouldn't need us as much. Now that day was here, and instead of feeling free, I felt like we'd reached the edge of something neither of us had prepared for. Sarah called me 3 days after she arrived. Hey, how is it? Good. She sounded tired. Tired good or tired bad? Tired good. I smiled. What did you do today? Painted. All day? Almost. Did you like it? She paused. Sometimes. I laughed. That's not very convincing. I hated one of them. How bad? Bad enough that I almost threw it away. Did you? No. Why? I wanted to see if I could fix it. I smiled. That's new. What is? You usually would have thrown it away. She was quiet. Maybe. Then she said, David? Yeah? Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever think about the version of me you met? I leaned back in my chair. Sometimes. What do you remember? I thought about it. Your hair. She laughed. Seriously? Yeah. You remember my hair? It was short. It was terrible. It was. She laughed again. What else? You were always doing something. Like what? I don't know. Painting, reading, going somewhere, planning something. She went quiet. Then she said, I miss that. I didn't know what to say. She continued, but I don't want it back. That surprised me. Why not? Because that girl didn't know anything. Like what? Like what she actually wanted. She took a breath. She thought having endless choices meant having a good life. And now? Now I think having choices means being responsible for what you choose. I smiled. That sounds exhausting. It is. She laughed. Then her voice became quieter. But it's also exciting. We talked for another 20 minutes. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I realized something. I had spent weeks thinking Sarah was trying to get her old life back. She wasn't. She was trying to stop measuring her current life against a version of herself that had never had to make difficult choices. That was different. And it meant I had been asking the wrong question. I kept asking, what did she lose? Maybe the better question was, what does she want now? The answer didn't have to be something she had wanted 20 years ago. A week later, she called again. This time she sounded upset. I messed up. What happened? I ruined a painting. You said you almost ruined one before. No, this one is actually ruined. I smiled. Okay. She didn't laugh. I don't know what I'm doing. You don't have to. I thought I would come here and suddenly feel like myself again. I stayed quiet. I thought I'd walk into a studio and everything would make sense. It doesn't. No. She took a breath. I still don't know what I'm doing. I smiled. Maybe that's the point. There was silence. Then she said, you know what I realized today? What? I've spent my entire life thinking confidence means knowing what you're doing. And maybe it means being okay with not knowing. I thought about all the times she'd said those words. I don't know. Maybe they weren't signs that something was wrong. Maybe they'd been the first honest answers she'd given herself in years. Sarah? Yeah? I'm proud of you. She was quiet. Then she said, don't. What? Don't make this another thing I'm doing for you. I understood immediately. I smiled. Okay. She laughed. Good. After we hung up, I realized how much I'd changed in those few weeks. A month earlier, hearing Sarah say she didn't know what she wanted would have terrified me. I would have started making suggestions. Now I could hear it and leave it alone. Because not knowing wasn't the same as being lost. Sometimes it was just the beginning. 3 weeks went faster than I expected. Sarah called less toward the end. At first, I worried. Then I realized she was busy. She was making friends, painting, walking around the city, doing things without checking in. And I didn't want to become another obligation she had to manage. When she finally came home, I was waiting at the airport. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing near baggage claim with her suitcase beside her. She looked tired. Her hair was messy. She was wearing the same ridiculous sunglasses from the old photograph. I laughed when she spotted me. She walked over. Don't say it. You look ridiculous. I knew you were going to say that. I hugged her. She held on tightly. I missed you. I missed you too. We walked toward the car. On the way home, she talked almost the entire time. She told me about the people she'd met, the paintings she loved, the paintings she hated, the woman who had convinced her to repaint something 3 times, the coffee shop she'd visited every morning, the afternoon she'd spent walking without knowing where she was going. I listened. I didn't tell her what any of it meant. I didn't ask whether she was going to keep painting. I didn't ask whether she wanted a studio. I didn't ask whether she was happier now. When we got home, she put her suitcase down and went straight to the garage. I followed. Her unfinished painting was still on the workbench. She stared at it. Then she laughed. I hate this. I smiled. Good. She looked at me. Why good? Because you sound like yourself. She shook her head. No. She picked up a brush. I sound like someone who finally knows she doesn't like this painting. I laughed. Fair enough. She started painting over part of it. I watched for a moment. Then I turned to leave. David? I looked back. She was holding the brush in one hand. What? I need to tell you something. I waited. She looked nervous. I think I know what I meant. About what? The best years. I didn't move. She looked at the canvas. When I said the best years of my life were before I met you, I wasn't saying I wanted my old life back. I nodded. I know. No, I don't think you do. She put the brush down. I thought those years were the best because I had so much time. Time. Time to become someone. She looked at me. Every year felt like the beginning of something. She smiled faintly. After we got married, everything became about maintaining what we'd built. I understood. She continued. I loved our life. I loved you. I loved the kids. She took a breath. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking what came next for me. I didn't say anything. And when the kids started growing up, I suddenly had all this space. She looked around the garage, and I didn't know what to put in it. I nodded slowly. So you thought your best years were behind you? At first. And now? She smiled. Now I think I was wrong. I looked at her. What changed? She picked up the brush again. I realized the best part wasn't being 24. She dipped the brush into paint. It was believing I could still become someone I hadn't met yet. She looked at me. And I think I can still do that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask for weeks. Do you still want me in that life? She looked almost offended. Of course, I smiled. Even if I don't understand it? She laughed. Especially then. I nodded, and for the first time since that Thursday night, I didn't feel like I was losing my wife. I felt like I was finally getting to know her. For the first week after Sarah came home, I kept waiting for something dramatic to happen. Nothing did. She went back to work. Lily still needed rides. Evan still left dishes in his room. We still argued about what to order for dinner. Sarah still forgot where she put her phone at least twice a day. Our life looked almost exactly the same, but Sarah didn't. She started painting 3 evenings a week, sometimes for an hour, sometimes until midnight. She never asked if I minded, and I never asked when she'd be finished. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her looking at rental listings on her laptop. What are those? She turned the screen toward me. Small studios. My first instinct was immediate. I wanted to ask how much they cost, whether they had parking, how far they were from the house, whether she'd actually use one enough to justify the rent. All reasonable questions, all questions I'd asked some version of 20 years ago. So I said nothing. Sarah smiled. You're struggling. Very much. She laughed. You can ask. Do you want one? She looked back at the screen. I think so. Then that's my question. She stared at me. That's it? That's it. A week later, she rented a small room above a bookstore 15 minutes from our house. It wasn't impressive. The floor was scratched. The window didn't close properly. There was barely enough space for 2 large canvases. Sarah loved it. The first evening she went there, I helped carry her supplies upstairs. She unlocked the door and stood in the middle of the empty room. I looked around. You sure about this? She smiled. No. I laughed. Good. She put her brushes on the windowsill. Then she looked at me. You can go. That caught me off guard. You don't need help? No. With the table? I can do it. I nodded. Okay. I kissed her and left. Walking down the stairs felt stranger than it should have. For most of our marriage, if Sarah started something, I became part of it. That was how I showed love. Now I was learning that sometimes the loving thing was leaving. A month passed. Then 2. Sarah didn't become a different person. That surprised me. Some part of me had expected a transformation. Instead, she was still Sarah. She still worried about the kids, still fell asleep during movies, still complained when I loaded the dishwasher wrong. But there were parts of her life I wasn't involved in anymore. People from the studio knew her in ways I didn't. She had paintings I hadn't seen, stories she sometimes forgot to tell me. At first, that bothered me. Then one evening I understood why. I had spent years thinking closeness meant knowing everything. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it meant trusting someone even when part of their life belonged only to them. One night, Sarah came home around 10. I was reading in bed. She changed clothes and climbed in beside me. Good night, she said. Good night. A few seconds passed. Then she said, David? Yeah? Do you remember what you asked me after I came back from Chicago? What? If I still wanted you in my life. I closed my book. Yeah. That question bothered me. I looked at her. Why? Because you thought this was about choosing between myself and you. I didn't answer. She was right. Maybe I did. Sarah turned toward me. I spent years thinking those were the choices too. What do you mean? Either I was a good wife and mother, or I was selfish. She paused. Either I chose the family, or I chose myself. And now? Now I think that was the mistake. She looked at me. I don't need less of you, David. She took my hand. I need more of me. I'd heard her say similar things before, but this time I finally understood. She wasn't trying to escape our marriage. She was trying to stop asking our marriage to contain every part of who she was. I squeezed her hand. I'm still scared sometimes. Of what? That one day you'll realize you're happier without me. She smiled. Do you know what Chicago taught me? What? That I can be happy without you. That wasn't the answer I wanted. She saw it on my face and laughed. Let me finish. Please. I can be happy without you. She moved closer. But that doesn't mean I want to live without you. I looked at her. For 20 years, I had treated those two things as if they were the same. They weren't. Maybe love wasn't being someone's entire world. Maybe it was being the person they continued choosing after they remembered they had a world of their own. Sarah rested her head against my shoulder. You know what the strangest part is? What? I don't think I want the life I wanted at 24 anymore. The studio? I have one. Travel? Sometimes. Italy? She laughed. Still Italy. Good. Then she became quiet. I think that's why it took me so long to tell you. I looked at her. Tell me what? That the best years of my life were before I met you. I waited, she continued. For years I thought saying it out loud would mean our marriage had failed. And now? Now I think I was comparing two completely different things. She looked up at me. Back then I loved my life because everything was still possible. She squeezed my hand. Then I loved this life because it was ours. And now? She smiled. Now I'm trying to learn how to have both. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, I stayed awake for a while, not because I was afraid anymore, because I finally understood what I'd spent months trying to solve. The woman I'd seen in those old photographs wasn't gone, but she wasn't waiting to be rescued either. Sarah didn't need to become her again. She needed permission from herself to keep becoming someone new. And maybe that was what neither of us had understood when we were younger. A marriage wasn't supposed to be the end of becoming. It was supposed to be a place where two people could keep changing and still choose to come home to each other. The next morning, I woke up before Sarah. She was still asleep beside me. For a moment, I watched her breathing and thought about how much had changed without our marriage actually changing. We still loved each other. We still lived in the same house. We still argued about stupid things, but something had finally become visible that had been there for years. Sarah had been trying to find herself, and I'd been trying to help her find the person I remembered. I realized then that those were two completely different things. A few weeks later, I went to her studio after work. She had asked me to come by. When I opened the door, she was standing in front of a large canvas. It was almost finished. I looked at it. There were no bright colors like the paintings she'd made when she was younger. It was quieter, darker, but there was a narrow line of yellow running through the center. What do you think? She asked. I smiled. I like it. She laughed. You always say that, because I usually do. No, I mean, what do you really think? I looked at the painting again. I think it looks like you. She raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? I don't know. She laughed. Fair answer. I stepped closer. Do you know what I think I finally understand? What? The best years weren't necessarily the years before me. She became quiet. I continued. I think they were the years when you believed there was still a lot of life ahead of you that you hadn't discovered yet. She looked at the painting. Maybe. And I think somewhere along the way, we both started treating our life like we'd already figured it out. She nodded slowly. We did. We had the house, the kids, the jobs, everything. Everything we were supposed to have. I smiled. Yeah. She looked at me. But you know what? What? I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. She waited, because I don't think I would have traded those years. She smiled. Neither would I. Even knowing what you know now? Especially knowing what I know now. She walked over and took my hand. I don't regret meeting you. I know. I don't regret our kids. I laughed. Good. She smiled. But I do regret thinking that loving all of you meant I had to disappear. I squeezed her hand. And I regret thinking that loving you meant making sure you never had to struggle. She looked at me. We were both wrong. Yeah. She leaned against my shoulder. For a while we just stood there. Then she looked at the painting again. I think I'm going to change the whole thing. I laughed. You just said it was almost finished. I know. Why change it? She picked up a brush. Because I don't like it anymore. I smiled. Then change it. She looked at me. You really don't care if I ruin it? No. Why? Because it's yours. She smiled. That was all. I left her there that evening. I didn't tell her what colors to use. I didn't ask when she'd be finished. I didn't ask what the painting meant. I drove home knowing something I hadn't understood when she first spoke those words. The best years of her life didn't have to be behind her, and neither did mine. A few months later, Sarah started teaching a small painting class at the studio. Nothing huge. 6 people. 2 evenings a week. She wasn't making much money. She didn't care. She liked it. Sometimes she'd come home excited, sometimes frustrated. Sometimes she would say she was thinking about quitting, and sometimes she'd change her mind the next morning. I stopped trying to predict which version of her I'd get. I just listened. One evening, we were sitting on the porch after dinner. Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Do you remember what you asked me that night?" "Which night?" "The night I told you the best years of my life were before I met you." I smiled. "Unfortunately. You asked if I wanted to leave." "Yeah. I think that was the wrong question." "I know. What do you think the right question was?" I thought about it. Then I said, "What do you want your next years to look like?" She smiled. "That's a better question." She looked toward the house, then at me. "I don't know." I laughed. She laughed too, but this time, neither of us was afraid of the answer. She reached for my hand. "I think that's okay." "Yeah." We sat there quietly. The house behind us was still our house. The kids were still upstairs. Tomorrow would still bring bills, work, traffic, laundry, and all the ordinary things we'd spent 20 years complaining about. Nothing about our life had become perfect. It had simply become bigger. There was room for Sarah, room for me, room for the family, and room for the people we might still become. I used to think the best years of a marriage were the ones you could look back on and say, those were the good years. Now I think maybe that's the wrong way to measure a life. Maybe the best years aren't the ones where everything was already known. Maybe they're the years when you still have the courage to wonder what comes next. Sarah once told me the best years of her life were before she met me. For a long time, I thought those words meant our marriage had taken something from her. Now I understand what she was really trying to tell me. She wasn't asking me to give her the past back. She was asking me to believe that she still had a future. And for the first time in 20 years, I did. We sat there holding hands. Neither of us knew what the next few years would bring. And somehow, that uncertainty didn't scare me anymore. It felt like the beginning.